Here we go. Welcome to another edition of Tequila Tuesday. Scott Leese. There might be a bunch of new names and faces here. We had a good number of people join us in the last couple of days, so welcome to everybody. Appreciate you coming on board and joining our crew here. All the people who are in this Patreon group are going to be super helpful and responsive and just here to help in any way that they can. So welcome, and that goes for myself included. If y'all ever need anything, just message me on Patreon or LinkedIn, and I'm here to help. So I'm joined today by Will Allred. If you don't know Will, he's the co-founder of a company called Lavender that is Gong for email. It's kind of real-time email coaching. And the platform is amazing. I first heard about Lavender maybe a year ago or so. I think it was on my radar like fairly early, and stayed in contact, and just being kind of friend of the company, friend of the Wills, and connections on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and just kind of getting to know each other that way and building a relationship. And then had the opportunity not too long ago to come on board as an advisor, and I'm also an investor in Lavender. So full disclosure there, but I really believe in what they're up to, and want to be a part of the team and the mission and all that kind of good stuff. So this is not like 100% pro Lavender sales pitch. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to give you all some guidance and support and learnings around cold email in particular, do's, don'ts, tips, and whatnot. If you've never been to a Tequila Tuesday before, the format is basically I kind of get out of the way, unless I'm the one doing the training. I kind of get out of the way a little bit, move to the side. I'm going to give Will the floor. He's going to do his thing for a little bit. The chat usually is pretty active. If you have questions and you want me to take you off mute, let me know. You can either hit me with a private message, or you can drop your question there, in the public chat. I have a little list over here. I keep track of who wants to ask questions, and I kind of just go down the list and take people off mute and allow you all to interact and engage. And we'll go for about an hour and a half or so. And I'll drop Will's LinkedIn profile and the website in here, unless somebody's already beaten me to it, which would be helpful if anybody wants to do that. You guys should all try to connect with Will, connect with me, and connect with everybody who's here. So without further ado, Will, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Scott. It's cool to be here. I'm just thinking back to it's about a year ago that we got started on Lavender, and we were having like one of our first conversations, and I think it dawned on you about like 10 minutes into the conversation, like, oh, these guys just got started. So it's good to be here. But as you mentioned, I'm not here to sell Lavender by any stretch. My goal today is to help you guys walk away better at emailing. And so there's quite a few things that I can dive into. At the end of the day in the sales, email makes up about 20 to 80% of your day-to-day, depending on how email heavy your organization is. And so my belief and belief of the company that we've built is it also should not be 20 to 80% of the anxiety in your day. Cold email tends to be a hot topic. So I built out an agenda that definitely touches on that a good bit. It's one of the only places where we kind of end up just talking to ourselves. And so that tends to be a place where a lot of people want to focus, but I've also put together some points on, what happens after the reply. So, it doesn't have to be just a full cold email session. I typed out like a quick agenda, so I'll post it in the chat. If there's certain things that you want me to hit like further on, I definitely can. But this was sort of what I was thinking as far as what we could go through today. And so the first thing is, starting with, why cold emails are hard tends to be one of those things that like we get in our own head about and we get in our own way with. Next, I want to provide a good framework for approaching cold email. I refer to this as inbox triage, but I'll also go through like a specific example of like how that comes to life as you're writing a cold email. So make it very concrete for you. Then the next thing I want to do is just break down like the key elements of what a cold email is. So subject lines and preview text, get deep on personalization because I think it's critical to driving open rates. The flow of your writing. A lot of times I see sales reps sort of jump from one topic to the next, and it's a bit of a jarring experience when you're trying to scale with templates. Clarity, which is frankly one of the biggest drivers of reply rate. We see 70% of emails are written beyond a 10th grade reading level, and I'll dig more into this, but it's kind of the reason you're getting ignored. It's folks scanning through their inbox and they're just not gathering the information. I'm going to talk to the you versus me ratio, you-I ratio. This is a great way to reduce that clarity score, but it's also just a great way to make sure that you're actually relevant and you're talking to your prospect as opposed to at your prospect. Touch on mobile first writing. My phone's right here. I'm 8 times more likely to open that email for the first time on my mobile phone. So just thinking about that in your email writing is key. CTAs, cutting the fluff out of your writing and like thinking through like your writing process. At that point, I figure it might be good to just kind of stop and we can dive into some things that you're working on within cold email. But if there's time and if you guys want to go through it, I've also got some additional thoughts to share on cadence design. I design around these things called bursts, and so we can dig into that. As well as like we can dig into some alternatives for getting in touch. You're part of Scott's Patreon group. The warm intro is probably the secret weapon of all founders, and salespeople do not talk about it whatsoever. And if you're out there building a good network and you're doing sales the right way, getting a warm intro can be something that you can use to your advantage, not just in sales, but networking. And it's just a good life skill to have. There's some etiquette to it that we don't always think about. And then last, and I'd love to get to this, we might not have the time, but what happens after the response? Email is the logistical backbone of deals. And so talking through pre-demo dialogue, I see too many reps just like, ask a question and then immediately be like, great, let's find time to talk. And it like kills the vibe of like everything that we tried to do in cold emailing. Talk through scheduling emails, meeting email etiquette, as well as like some post demo, like how to keep the dialogue going. Gong actually released some really great data around email velocity. Deals that close, there's 8 times more email activity between those accounts than deals that don't close. And so encouraging that dialogue, that back and forth, I want to just speak to that because there's some things that you can do, like ensuring that you ask questions that will make sure that you keep conversation going and you move deals to close. And then one last thing that we can do is talk about handling negotiations, because it tends to be something that prospects love to do in email, which is like, oh, great, give me this pricing. And then you're kind of in this awkward position in an inbox. So did want to bring that up as well, because it tends to be something that folks like to talk about. But last and certainly not least, live Q&A. Like if there's things that are on your mind, we can do it throughout. So like by all means, like raise your hand if you're like, Will, you're talking about something that like I'm dealing with right now. I am happy to just like bring you off screen share and like you can show me what you're working on, and I will happily help rewrite that on the fly, and it gives people some better context, which I think is always a good thing. That said, are there any topics that you all want me to speak more on? Scott, I'm not monitoring the chat too closely.
No, there's a few things that have been shot my way, but nothing I think to inject into the
cool
to the outline.
Great.
Go ahead, John Stern. Go ahead, take yourself off mute real quick.
Sure, thank you. Will, I'm curious, is the stuff that you're talking about in this framework, is this solely for email, or is the same things apply for like a cold LinkedIn message or DM or other, platforms also?
Yeah, with LinkedIn, the only difference from what I'm saying about email and how it applies to LinkedIn is you got to be shorter because little inbox is smaller. That would be one. The other would be more focused on dialogue and less on conversion. Like I'm a big conversation over conversion kind of person, and LinkedIn is a place where you have to even be more laser focused on encouraging dialogue as opposed to trying to drive a conversion. Too many folks in my LinkedIn inbox are like, great, let's jump on a call. And it's like, hey, you asked me a question. Don't you like want to discuss it? Because that's, yeah, kind of the point of LinkedIn. It's a networking site, not a, it's a networking site before it's an actual sales channel. And so treating it as such will do you wonders for your pipeline.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the main rules that I use when I think about cold email is, write something that you'd want to receive. And so I think that lesson alone could probably be applied to anything, whether that's cold calling or LinkedIn or SMS. Does that answer what you were looking for?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I just didn't know. I think the same principles apply, but I like how you said you do it shorter and more conversationally in LinkedIn and other social media than, a standard email or something. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm applying these principles correctly.
Yeah, when I get into the framework, you can apply the same framework, inbox triage, to LinkedIn. And one of the things to recognize with a LinkedIn inbox is it's going to be a bit more busy. It's also a place where like the text visual is smaller. And so you've got to be more cognizant of formatting. Like basically it's the same rule book, but the intensity for sensitivity is cranked up. So you just have to think about it that way. Cool. All right, so let's start with why cold email is hard. Because for some reason, if I post anything on LinkedIn that has nothing to do with cold email, nobody touches it. And it's because we get like wrapped in our head around cold email. And there's three main things that I think make cold email hard. The first is how we're taught to write in school. It does not line up. Two is the feedback, the lack thereof. It gets us into our own head. And then third is most emails are trash. And so when you're in their inbox, like they're on the defensive. And so you've got to meet them where they are. So let's start with school. So sales email isn't school writing. You're taught in school, academic writing. You're taught to sound smart, to over-explain, taught to be formal. You're taught to do pretty much everything that's going to ruin a sales email. One of the things I've noticed, like I was talking with a venture capitalist a few weeks ago, and the dude didn't even capitalize the first letter of like words in a sentence. Didn't even use punctuation. It was like, I was like, okay, this is mind-boggling. But at the same time, I'm not saying don't do that, because there are definitely folks out there that are grammar sticklers. But they're also not writing a college essay, and I don't think you should either. The next piece is like sales email is a bit of a mind game. So you can send a fantastic cold email and still get completely ignored. And this makes us doubt ourselves, and that doubt in turn makes us make mistakes. Last thing, average email is pretty much terrible. And there's a lot of them going out, especially during COVID. So like what we found is the average email is too complex. I think I mentioned it's written beyond a 10th grade reading level. It's typically too long too, and it's poorly formatted. And so it's not really surprising that the average reading time is about 11 seconds. And when you think about that one step further, the average time that someone takes to decide if they're going to ignore your message is about 3 seconds. And so after tonight, that 11 seconds won't be as much of a problem because we're going to talk about some things that you can do to mitigate that. That 3 second average time where they're deciding to ignore you, that's your mobile formatting. Just get that in line and you're in a good position. The 11 seconds, you can earn the right to get them to read the full email, and you can write it at a simple enough level. They will read it from top to bottom. They will gather all the information along the way. And you're going to find that your response rate goes up as a byproduct. So top 3 things that I'm seeing folks get wrong with email, and I can break these down into like pretty much infinite subtopics, but it's getting in your own head, not getting in your prospect's head. And so I'm going to talk to an inbox framework that I use, and really not meeting your prospect where they are, which is triaging and trying to just like figure out what they need to do. And so I start with cold email because it's just one of those things that people tend to be challenged with. Before I jump into framework, does that sound pretty on par with everyone's experience when it comes to cold email? You feel like
that's a really good point about how school taught you to write and how it doesn't transfer over into email. I never thought of it that way, to be honest with you, before.
Yeah, well, it's your grade is determined by how smart you sound, and when you're writing a sales email, the effort to sound smart is like the anti-response fuel. You end up like using these like jargony words. You try to use the buzzwords to sound like you're in the know. And half the time you have no idea how your own product works or how like the customer's going through their day to day. Scott, you talk about in your book, Addicted to the Process, like knowing your shit. And if you truly know your stuff, you can explain what you do, the problem that you solve, like you're talking to your niece or nephew, or you're talking to your mom. And like that's like the thing that I always hone in on with folks when they start like putting extra words in, extra verbiage. I'm like, what are you trying to get across? How would you explain this if your niece or nephew asked you the same question? Or another way to state it is like, okay, you're out to beers with a friend of a friend from college, and they ask you, what do you do? You're probably not going to be like, well, we've got a cloud chain visibility software that, helps you do the following things. And so, just keeping those things in mind is a good way to approach email writing. Because, all right, let me get into this framework because I think it'll help you understand where I'm coming from. Because I refer to this as inbox triage, and it kind of guides everything that we're doing at Lavender, but also everything that I'm thinking about when it comes to like, hey, here's actually how your prospect is reading your email. And so, Scott, tell me if this sounds like a familiar process. You log into Gmail, you scan subject lines, you're looking for names that you recognize, you're looking for threads that you recognize. Then there's all the stuff in between, which is like noise. And you're like looking at the noise and you're like, okay, I got to get through this so I can get back to my to-do list. And so you scan the subject lines, you look at the preview text, you're basically trying to determine, is this interesting? Is this something that I want to engage with? If it is, you click in, you scan the content, average about 11 seconds. Then you're categorizing. You're saying, what is this? What do they want me to do? What am I supposed to do with this? And then you're trying to take an action. It's either you do something, you delegate it to somebody else, or you delay, which means you inevitably ignore it. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, for sure. 100. The only other thing that I'd say is, for me, I'm looking for like, is there anything here that I can respond to quickly that requires virtually no thought? Like if I have to think about it at all, it gets kind of put in that delay category. So as I'm scanning, I'm like, what can I say yes to or just deal with real quick? But yeah, it sounds super familiar to me.
Yeah, and I'll speak to CTAs a little bit later, but a lot of the thinking behind CTAs, and like, I don't know if everyone's seen like the Gong research, but interest-based CTAs and cold email is like the way to go. It's like 2 times more effective. And the plain and short, simple reason that it works is because it's a yes or no question. Is this interesting? YES. Is this interesting? NO. It's much easier to respond to than vague notion of like, hey, how's your calendar look next week? And I'm thinking to myself, my calendar is a dumpster fire.
Good show.
That's stressful. I don't want to touch that. So then I just put it on delay and I'm like, I'll get back to that eventually. Okay. So inbox triage, it has got to be something that you recognize. Their mindset is me oriented. They are focused on their to-do list. It is borderline fight or flight once they get to your email. And so, using triage, you can actually write a framework that will really work for cold email. And so I'll walk through just like a quick email. So like first things first, subject line, right? So 2 to 3 words. I like to hit on a task that they're dealing with. When in doubt, just default to company name, because for some reason it works, because mostly people's eyes kind of glaze over it and they move on. But how that's going to start. Hi, Scott. I noticed this about you. Here's an insight based on an observation that I made. I had a customer deal with something similar. It's actually why I'm reaching out. We solved that with X. They saw Y outcome. Is X a challenge for you right now? Talk soon, Will. Very simple.
Will, do you have that on a slide or something that you could put up? Because I see people trying to like write it down. Maybe it would be helpful if they could see that little frame.
Yeah, and I'll copy paste it too into the chat.
Yeah, that works. That works too. Yeah.
Cool. So we can go through that line by line and I'll explain why that fits within triage. So that first line, Scott, notice this about you. That's preview text optimization. And so what that's going to say when Scott's going through his inbox in that triage is, oh, this was written for me. It's not just something that was sent out of a spam cannon. And I should actually open it to see what this person thought about when they wrote me a note. So that's going to earn you the open. I can say through personal testing, that first line, if it's truly personal, you're going to see your open rate jump above 50%. It's just plain and simple because people's curiosity, their egos will drive them to just open the message because they're like, okay, what did this person take the time to write me about? But the next part is you've got to earn that read. And so the next sentence, here's an insight based on that observation. You can also use the question, here's a question based on that observation. What you're saying is like, I get your to-do list and I'm not just like reaching out to waste your time. Then you quickly are trying to transition into answering clearly why you reached out. And so, based off the observation, like a way that I'll write it is, we met company at a similar time. They were dealing with X. We solved it with Y. That transition, a lot of sales templates aren't necessarily designed for every single type of personalization that you could come up with. And so you have to take the extra time to go into that template as well and make sure that it creates that smooth flow from top to bottom. Lastly, or not necessarily lastly, but within that transition, I'm also using the customer to tell my story as opposed to me just sort of bragging about what we do. Obviously, if you don't have the customer, it's okay. But it's one of those things that if I'm going to just talk about, what it is that we're doing, I try to lead with someone else whose problem we're solving as well. It just makes it easier to tie that relevance back to them. The other piece to using a customer name is that creates this okay, I could see myself in that other person's shoes, creates this relatability that can be really helpful. Then, getting to what you do and the outcomes you drive, also very helpful because, I think we tend to get a little preachy talking about here's all the things that we do, or feature dump, we could do all the following things to help you out. And in reality, they don't care. They don't want to hear from you that much. They don't want to list out, they'll do their own research if they want to. Just say what you do in 6 seconds. Try to make it as concrete and as obvious as possible. A great way to do that is to tie it to the outcomes that you're driving. So like, it's easy for me to want to like be like, yes, we are an email platform and we've got personalization, we've got a writing coach, we've got, all this stuff, and they don't care. It's not going to drive any more responses than if I go in and I just say, hey, we've got a tool that helps your sales reps write emails that are better, faster. They're going to get X% more replies. Like that's much more concrete in the mind of the person who's reading it. And so it'll come across better. And then last is that opt-in for conversation. There's different ways that you can frame this. I'll paste this in the chat as well. One of my favorites is to use technology. So it's like, say I noticed that like they're using a certain tech platform. I'll say like, hey, I saw you're using this. Like, how do you like it? It's great for this, but it definitely falls short with that. Customer that I know using the platform dealt with something similar. We came in and helped them with Y, and they saw Z outcome. Is that something you're dealing with currently? I actually implemented that with someone who was working at a chatbot company at the time, and took her already pretty high reply rate of like 11% and just got that up to about like 22. So, it's pretty effective. It's just very simple. It states that like, I get where you're coming from, but at the same time, like there's something that I can do to help. Eric, I see you've got a specific question. So if you want to jump off mute.
Hey, Will, it's great to meet you. First time here.
Yeah, man.
Hopefully you're not related to Amy Volas.
What's that?
Inside joke. Scott will tell you later on. She's great. No offense.
Oh, yeah.
First time here. So we sell a security scorecard. No selling anything, no deeper than that. But we know some of our customers use our competitors. I really can't find out if they're using our competitors, but can I use that template that you just threw in the Zoom chat to somehow say, we see customers who are using BitSide or Panorama, these other products? Is that not valid and good for this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was working with a rep over at a cybersecurity company the other day, and Microsoft is a big competitor of theirs. And so he was looking at profiles, and like some of the people's profiles would be like, we use tech 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so I was like, great, you can use that. But the way I proposed it is tying back to the why of like, first off, like I only do it if I know they use the competitor, but I would tie it back in the way of, given you're using X, I thought you'd have a great perspective on what we're building at our company. And I find that to be a much more inviting way to get dialogue going, where it's like, hey, I think you'd have a really good like eye for comparing one product against the other because you're already using one product. It just, for some reason it works. But it's probably not good to like badmouth a competitor. And that's, I would wait until you actually know. That's probably what I'll stick with, as opposed to like trying to guess. Because if you're going out making assumptions, it's not going to do you any good. I find the more assumptions you make, the lower your reply rate goes. Okay, hopefully that was
he's not
helpful.
in the same.
Yeah, cool. And it's honestly good timing because I was going to pause for questions right now, just since I like threw out some frameworks to talk through, because they could be applied in a number of different ways.
Jason Istrin, if Jason's here, you can take yourself off mute. There he is.
How's it going?
How's it going?
Hey.
Well, thanks for the information. So one of my questions was regarding voicemail and emails. And one of the things that we found for our voicemails is the least we put into a voicemail and the more ambiguous we make a voicemail, the higher our response rate is. And now that we're putting together more email streams, what we've also found is the more personal we make it, the shorter we make it, and again, the more ambiguous we make it, people start to respond with, you know, well, how would that work? Right? Or very quick responses, but they start that conversation with us more on a personal level, which has worked, you know, okay. Just curious how you see those comparisons.
Yeah, and I'm curious how you bring that to life. Because is it something like, hey, I saw you're using X company. How are
So
you
we're in the
approaching X
we're in the
company?
real estate industry. So our voicemail would be like, hey, Will, you know, calling you about your property at 123 Test Street, which is your vacation home. You know, please call me back as soon as possible. Which personally, somebody leaves that voicemail for me, I'm like, is my house on fire? Right? So I'm going to call that person back. And we get a lot of callbacks because of that. On the email side, the email is, again, very short. Hey, Will, calling you about your property at 123 Test Street. Have some really, like, I have some questions I'd really like to chat with you about real quick. Do you have any time to talk?
I'm curious if, you know, your reply rate might be lower if you get more specific, but at the same time, you can, like, your through funnel conversion might be higher if you're more specific, because they'll go into it knowing what to expect. And so you're driving more of that conversation. I like how short it is. I like how simple it is, frankly. But you know, giving some cleaner direction could help you know, like, okay, say it's like there's a company in Atlanta called rented.com, and rented.com, you can basically, like, it's like Airbnb, but wholesale. So like if I've got a secondary property, I can be like, hey, I want to just like sell off January to June. So if I'm reaching out to a particular individual, I might say, like, you know, Jason, reaching out about your property at 123 Street. You know, are you currently renting that property, or have you ever been interested in renting that property? Curious what you think of that, Jason.
Yeah, so we're in a unique situation where people misconstrue the word rent a lot with us. They're like, talk to our property manager. Yes, we rent it all the time. It's on Airbnb, right? And our goal is to actually lease it long term. So it kind of gets misconstrued there.
Gotcha.
It really takes us, because we're a startup, because what we're doing is not traditional. It really takes a little bit of explaining to homeowners what the model is.
Yeah.
Just, our number one goal is just get them on the phone so we can give them as much information as possible.
Gotcha. I might lead with a question like, hey, are you renting your property on a platform like Airbnb? And just get the conversation going with more
Like
direction.
that.
Yeah. It's much more of a conversation starter. That's not like a, yeah, you're not misleading them. Like, you know where the conversation's going to go. Like, I'll speak to subject lines in a second. And like, one of the things I say is like, almost make it look like an internal email. But, you know, if you're making it look like an internal email and like the body of the message doesn't match, like, you're basically like lying to the person. You're like setting them up with a promise and then not delivering. And so, you know, if you approach it with like, hey, are you like renting your property currently on Airbnb? They know it has something to do with rental. They know it has something to do with like, yeah, we do right now. And then you already know, like, okay, this is a qualified person for me to talk to. Or if they say no, they're like, no, why do you ask? But I think that might set up some better dialogue.
I agree. I like that a lot. Thank you.
Cool.
We got a question from somebody who's not here anymore. They had to run, but they sent me the question. Vicky had a question, Will, about how to resonate with 5 different generations in the workforce at once right now. And probably the widest range in terms of diversity that we've ever had, and tips for, you know, striking like a broad enough kind of tone and tenor that is appealing to everybody in that, you know, everybody in the workforce right now, right?
Yeah. So is this a question of just like, how do you strike the right tone in a cold email?
Yeah, but she's specifically making the assumption that it's more difficult than ever because like somebody is 23 receiving an email and somebody else is 35 and somebody's 47 and somebody's 65. And, you know, we're more globalized than we've ever been before.
Yeah.
Maybe there's more, you know, diverse, just more diversity, like in sales. There's more women coming into sales, more people of color or minority, all this kind of stuff. And like the way you talk is different potentially depending on who your audience is, right? I think
Yeah.
that's what she was driving at, and she's here to articulate it better.
And that's honestly perfect, because I know formality was like the one thing that I didn't put on the agenda, so we can definitely get into it. The data that we're seeing across the board is it's this like middle ground where it's not necessarily casual, but it's not necessarily like stuffy academic formal. I love the example of like I'm talking to an acquaintance from school that I'm not necessarily close friends with, where like I wouldn't necessarily be like super chummy out of the gate, but I'm also not going to be like, you know, a stiff board who, can't necessarily speak to it. It's fun. You know, we're building at Lavender. You know, this will be one of the things that will start to fluctuate over time as you're writing to folks and we learn what works for you. But, you know, I think one of the places you could start is like, if you're really concise and you're really clear in your writing, there's not a lot of wiggle room for like tones to be misconstrued. There's not a lot of wiggle room for like you to add unnecessary tones, especially if like your intent is, hey, you know, Scott, I did all this research on you. I have like a really relevant conversation that I'm trying to start. You know, you can then, you know, once you generate the response, even if it's the most informal thing on the planet, and you've like earned the right to get a response at that point, yeah, you can just start to mirror their tone after the fact. There's plenty of times where I've like emailed somebody something fairly casual and gotten a response back where it's like Will : that is like the ultra signal of like I am a formal writer, because they have basically started their email with the colon. I don't know why that's a thing, but but like you can start to see like how they talk and how they write, and you just want to mirror that back to them, because there's actually interesting academic research where they looked at lawyers in the courtroom, and if they mirrored the judge, they were 2 times more likely to win the case. And so you could sort of take that for what it's worth, but like getting the conversation started, I don't think too heavily about being like, I don't overthink like my level of formality. I think about how can I show them that I've known them, I've got something relevant that I want to talk to them about, and like basically get out. As Richard, our dear friend Richard Harris would say, be brief, be brilliant, and be gone.
Yeah.
Which like at that point, there's not much wiggle room for tonality to make a play there.
Okay.
Cool.
I got more questions if you want to take them.
Yeah, we can get into them, and then let's probably cap it at like 2, and then we'll jump into elements of cold email.
It's Chris. Are you here? Are you still here, Chris? There you are.
Hey.
Hey.
I'm not sure that I had a question so much as just been commenting, Scott.
Oh, maybe I screwed up then. Okay.
Cynthia. Well, I find that hard to believe. It was probably me.
All right. Well, good to see you. Cynthia, we'll go to you.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Hey Will, so great to chat with you. I actually just downloaded Lavender today because my email campaigns are like horrible and I'm like desperate for your help. So this is amazing timing. And so my question is, well, I have like 5,000 questions. My main question is, we all know customization is more effective, but it takes more time. Mm-hmm. I love on Lavender that it's got that little timer, because I noticed I was like agonizing when email. I was at the 6-minute mark. I'm like, I'm hitting send. That's it. But my question to you is, what's the most effective way to do, or what's the sweet spot for customization at scale for emails? Because I'm just I've got this massive list I'm trying to get through, and I hate that spray and pray, but I need to get stuff out. What are your thoughts here?
probably more than we could cover in 90 minutes. But let's start with, several places we could start. One would be, there's actually some pretty good SalesLoft data where they've looked at the level at which templates were personalized and what that did for response rates. And they found if you're templatized, if you just send like a straight up template, you're just going to do the worst. If you completely customize that template, you also do the worst. So there is something to be said for repeatability, where it's like something is working, and so we need to at least like stick to the formula. They find that sweet spot to be somewhere between 20% and 80%. And judging by how much output you need to get out the door, lean more towards that 20% if that's going to be more useful for you. We can dig more into like personalization in a bit. That is one of the key things for cold email that I wanted to talk to. But the key to like churning out a high volume of email is know your customer. That's like an easy one. But like also put down a process, like know where you're going to go to find the information that you're looking for, and then know what templates are going to match that personalization. I think we try to get a little too like cookie cutter with the template. And it's like, if you have an arsenal of templates that you can like plug and play based off of different like triggers that you're seeing, drive that email or like drive why you're reaching out. It makes it a lot easier for you to scale, putting that like first line in and then getting into a nice template. Is that helpful?
No, it's definitely helpful. And I would think that it would be, those sort of more customizable templates that make sense would be industry specific, right? So if like a specific vertical or title that might resonate with the solution, I'm assuming.
Yeah. You're kind of touching on another way that you can really speed up your personalization efforts, and it's targeting. You get handed like this monster list and they're like, have fun. If you don't like slice and dice that down into very nuanced specifics, like I will take a prospecting list and I'll go into LinkedIn Sales Navigator and I'll be like, all right, what role are they in? What industry are they in? What industries have they been in? And like, how long have they been in the role? So like I'll have a campaign for sales VPs that have been in an individual contributor role that have been in the job for less than 6 months. And like, I'll even target that to a specific geography so I don't have to like think too hard. And so like with that, you can like kind of get the same message out the door a few times in a row and you don't have to think as hard about it. Your research might find that like there's something nuanced about it that like a LinkedIn Sales Navigator didn't pick up on, but that's another way that you can really up output, is just getting smarter about targeting.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Cool.
Going, Will.
Cool. All right. So we will jump into elements of a cold email. And so let's start with like the top one that like people love to talk about. I actually don't think like this is as important as people think it is, but it's the subject line. It's the first thing that people see. And so you're not going to get a response if no one opens it. And it's, one of those things that we should probably like look towards. The data that we have on our end is pretty simple. Just keep it to 2 to 3 words. Don't try to be a sensationalist, like use a neutral sentiment. Some other like minute things that we see are like, title case. So like capitalize the first letter of every word, unless it's like of, right? You don't capitalize that, looks weird. But the big reason why you keep it short is you're trying to optimize that preview space. And so that's really what's going to show like them that you've reached out and you've got something thoughtful to share. The content of that subject line, I try to make it a summary of what's in the email. Ideally, it speaks to something on their to-do list. So like if I'm reaching out at the start of the quarter, I might use the subject line like Q3 email data or email performance. Like that mentally could be something that came from the RevOps team, but it's also like very much so a summary of what I'm going to discuss within my email. So that's like the first key element. And so summarize that up like 2-3 words, keep it focused on like a task item if you can. Default, just always go back to like company name, and recognize that preview text is really what's going to drive that open. And so with preview text, I want to start talking about personalization and not spend too much time on the subject line, because this is actually what's really going to drive the open is that like first line where you're showing a sincere effort. People love to talk about personalization as far as like personalization versus relevance, which one is more important to what you're doing. I think it's false. I don't think it's one or the other. What you're really looking for when you're trying to personalize is like a trigger. It's an event that say it's like, okay, a funding round has happened, or they're hiring, or there's like, it's a certain item that you're typically pulling in. I like to go a bit beyond that, back to the inbox triage. You want to show them that you're going towards their to-do list. And so if you start your email with like, hey, notice you're ramping up the sales team. You can start to get into like specific items that they're probably focused on, as opposed to, the classic, like, I don't know. I always go back to like funding as like that classic trigger. Funding is not a to-do list item. Scott, you've been in this seat before. What is the typical task list for a head of growth or VP of sales, after you've raised money and you've announced it publicly?
There isn't one. there's no specific thing that I do just because we raised. The closest thing I could think of would be maybe it's time to recruit, and we're going to add bodies. But other than that, there's nothing.
Right. And the problem is your inbox is, hey, Scott, congrats on the fundraise.
Buy my shit. Congrats on, now you have budget, buy my shit. That's exactly what it is.
It's like the easiest thing to go to. But you're right. Recruiting is probably like the next thing on the list. And it's one of those things that I actually love to, it's a gold mine for prospecting. The careers page on their company website, it is where you can find out the roles and responsibilities of someone's job, the roles and responsibilities that they delegate out, how they talk about those things, the technologies that they use, and like from a growth perspective, like where are they hiring to like bolster what they're doing in like certain areas. So like, are they hiring a bunch of people from marketing as opposed to sales? Like all these different things can like tell you a ton about the company. You can also get like some like insider ways of saying things. So like, I'll give a personal example. So like one of the things that our product is really good at helping with is onboarding new reps. And so in their like in the job description for SDR, 9 out of 10 times, they will list out like some name for what they use for orientation. And you better believe that is my subject line. And you better believe I'm referencing it in the first line. It's like, hey, ramp camp, like what's going on with like, email data for like how you're trying to teach these reps. Like it's one of those things that you can just like hammer home that says like, I'm going to stand out in your inbox and it's going to be different than everything else out there. It might not be something that's relevant for them. It might not be something that they're focused on, but like that level of personalization is going to at least like get you the open. It's going to get them to start reading your email and get them to the bottom of the email. What you're really trying to do with that like first line is, start the conversation around like why you're reaching out. You're really trying to earn the right to get their eyeballs to go top to bottom in a way that is truly trying to, you want them to actually grasp the information. You don't want them to be like categorizing. So many times like people think like, oh, I need to get to the point like super quick and like make my ask right up front. And like sometimes that's okay, but a lot of times people immediately be like, oh, it's a sales pitch, and then like they won't even like tune in to what you've written underneath it. And so instead of that, just like talking, like trying to start dialogue in that initial start of like, back to the framework that I provided. It's like, I noticed this certain thing about you, and thusly I had a question about your business, because in reality, there's probably not that much that you know. As much as we can dig in and do a bunch of research, we've got to send a bunch of emails and do a bunch of work. And so there's only so much you can gather. To that point, I think it's key to just have like a good process. So like my process, I love the careers page. It might be that you're focused on, let's see, I was talking to somebody the other day that's focused on like product experience. And so they were using like product review pages. It's like, it doesn't matter what your source of like truth is. It just matters that you've got a good process around it that works really well for gathering information and like getting to what they do. And there's, good technologies that you can use that pull things in, like, e-commerce is like a classic example. Like there's a company called Built With where they just like tell you everything that they use to like grow their business, and you can use that to like try to get a sense about the company. But you got to put that like level of effort in that says, I am trying to get to know you before I like start about on my email. I've gotten responses from folks where, it was funny. I got a response the other day where they were like, hey, you missed the mark, but give me a call. And so I called them, and they're like, hey, I didn't want you to think I was being rude, but I really appreciated the amount of effort that you took to get in touch with me. And that's like, okay, well, I at least got the conversation started. I got the demo, things moved forward. It didn't have to be perfect, but at least I showed that I put in effort. And I think we get so wrapped up in like, we've got to get X number of output numbers out that, we're just like, okay, we're not going to personalize. We're just going to like try to make this like relevant message. But that first line, if it doesn't look like it was personal, it's really just going to look like noise in the inbox. So last note on personalization, I would not go bananas with it. It really shouldn't take up more than 2 sentences. If you've got a bunch of stuff, save it for either another outreach or put it in like a PS. I find PSs like for the more personal stuff can be really useful. It's like, hey, saw you went to Arizona State, super cool. My grandfather went there, or something like that. Like that's where that note belongs. It doesn't belong in the start of the email because it's not necessarily tied to like a to-do list item.
Well, there's a couple questions from people about subject lines. If we go back a step,
Yep.
Vicky had a question, Vicky Gurney. You there, Vicky? We can't.
Oh, there I am. Couldn't get off mute. Sorry. So mine's, just bear with me. So if you're going company name in your title, or regarding, are you saying your company name, my company name, or my company name, your company name? Because your company name, and I want you to know my company name, but out of respect, I'm typically going to put, in courtesy, I'm going to put you first. I overthink.
It's funny you say that. So I typically lead with my company name. Think about the calendar invite. Because like the calendar invite, if it leads with your name, when it comes up as like the notification, they're going to see your name first and be like, oh, I've got a meeting with so-and-so, as opposed to just like, it just says like meeting with Vicky Gurney, and they're gonna be like, I know it's a meeting with me. It's on my calendar, but who's it with? Right. So you want to just
I love you. We're the only 2 people I think that do it that way, or people that I've run across, because I completely agree.
Well, cool.
And then Eric Korsberg had another question. It's kind of a combo question on subject lines as well as warm email.
Subject lines, I think you probably answered. Thank you. But Getting to the decision maker. So if you have a sales call set up, okay, you're going to be meeting with the point of contact. It could be a champion. You don't always get to find out who the decision maker is. So what do you think about a warm email to the decision maker if you can find out who that is without stepping on toes with a point of contact champion?
Yeah. I might be a bit brash on this in the sense that I'm gonna go for it and ask for forgiveness later, but I'll send a note to the VP and be like, hey, I'm talking to director. Super excited to talk to them about the following thing. Yeah, if it comes up, like I'm happy to explain more and like be a resource. But yeah, it sounds like following situation is in place, and I look forward to learning more about it. Yeah, that's a plenty good warm email. You think back to triage, right? They're looking for names they recognize, and they're looking for threads they recognize. And so if you lead up with like a name that they're gonna know, I'm not saying like be like mischievous with it, but if you actually have a call in the books with like so and so, I don't see a problem with like using it personally. No, that could come back to bite you like 1 out of 10 times. And, in those events, I think you just kind of, put your foot in your mouth and you're like, hey, I'm really sorry. I thought it was okay. And I think if you approach it the right way, they'll understand that it's your job.
Yeah, Scott Leese told me to do it. Just put it on his shoulders.
Yeah, that will either end in one of two ways. You'll either close the deal or you'll instantly just be dead to that person forever. But at least there's no in between. You get a decision out of that, Eric. That might be better. Continuing on kind of the warm email theme, and then we'll let you do your thing for a little bit. But there's one more question here, and it's from Wade Lee.
Hey, Will. So got a quick question here. I work, I'm an SDR, so obviously I'm doing emails every day. I work expansion currently. So I work with companies like Unilever, Nestle, Reckitt, like really large companies. And I'm curious your thoughts on leading with that opening first sentence. Is leading with something like, hey, we work with other Unilever teams, which lots of people work with Unilever teams because you're talking hundreds of thousands of employees, or something more specific to, let's say, if I'm talking to Dove's team in the US and I have a pain point specific to them, if that question makes sense, what do you think is more relevant starting off with?
I'm gonna answer your question with a question. How often do you run into IT process?
To what now?
Like a security review.
Oh, quite often, depending on who we're talking with, yeah.
Then I would start with the fact that you work with their company, because that will what that says to me is, great, I don't have to go to IT, it's already approved.
True. Good answer. Okay, cool.
Yeah, reduces the level of anxiety when it comes to evaluating new tech, because that process can be a pain. The other thing, and I can jump into this now, but like approaching it like the folks that you do work with and being like, hey, because a lot of times, especially when you're working with like the Unilevers of the world, like you might not know that customer on the other department, but you know someone within your company that does. And so you have to like take the approach of like, hey, I know you know so-and-so. We're trying to get into this account. Would you be open to introducing me to so-and-so to see if they'd be interested in making the introduction? And that other sales rep might say no, in which case, like, okay, there's only so much you can do, but it's worth a shot. And if they do make the introduction, you're much more likely to get the meeting in the event that they know them.
Yeah, very cool.
And I would probably just look to see like, are the two people at, say, Unilever in this example, like, are they connected? Because if they are, then it's like a really good, approach. If they're not, it might not be a good approach.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So I'll summarize the personalization bit, and then we can move on to the next part.
Yeah.
Cool. So, yeah, the key here is showing that you put in the effort. Don't write too much. I get emails all the time where it's like, sell your content, then they like write another thing, then they like talk about using the product. And I'm like, okay.
How much is too much, Will? Can you give people guidance on how much is too much? Is it like word count, letter count, stanzas? Like what's too much?
Yeah. One complex sentence, two simple sentences would be the way that I would describe that. And honestly, your complex sentences should just be two simple sentences. So no more than two simple sentences. I find that if it gets beyond that, people have this like moment of, what do you want? Or like, what do you want from me? Which is not the mindset that you're trying to put them in when you're writing that personalization. And so getting to that transition is key. Being mindful of your formatting, as I mentioned there, like it's easy to like quickly create this like wall of text at the beginning of the email. But I would just focus to speak to their to-do list and try to move on to the next piece, which is building credibility. Say like you open up with like a question, like some insightful nugget, like you want to immediately answer with like credibility of like, here's why I asked that question. Or making an observation. It's like, here's why I have the credibility to make said observation. And so you want to get to the next part pretty quick, so that their eyes keep scanning downwards without like kind of zoning out. And that actually leads to like the next point, which is like good flow is pretty crucial. You're given a template and it's really easy to just like throw a first liner in there and hope for the best. But you want to make sure that you're not creating this like jarring experience, because people will scan. And so if you, if you jump from like this personalized bit to like this hardcore pitch about yourself, it can be a bit of a moment where they either like tune out, or they're just kind of like, okay, this was a template. They can kind of sniff it out pretty quickly, and so that flow is pretty crucial to doing that. Do you want to keep moving, because I think this is probably the most important point, which is like clarity is probably more important than anything else that you could be doing. I mentioned this 10th grade reading level. Over 70% of emails are written beyond a 10th grade reading level. And it's not that your prospect can't read at a 12th grade reading level. It's that they don't have the time and they don't want to. And so the simplest way to change this up is short, choppy copy. Breaking up those like long sentences, getting to shorter words, more common words, that's going to reduce that grade level. And if you can get your email to a 5th grade reading level from a 10th grade reading level, the data shows that you will get 30% more replies. It comes down to the fact that they're scanning, they can absorb more information. And so, you're just putting yourself into a better situation. The other way that you can reduce that clarity level or improve that clarity level, probably the better way to say it, is optimize that I to U ratio of statements. So I tend to find folks get trapped at like an 8th grade reading level when, in reality, what they've done is they've broken up their sentences, but it's still just them like pitching. And it's like, hey, here's our feature set. Here's our product. Here's what we do. Like, does this sound interesting? And like, that's where, if I find that if you start talking about them as opposed to yourself, you tend to know less. And so you tend to say less, and it's easier to simplify down from there. So that's probably one of like the biggest keys. And it's one of those things that just like, we see it like really drive response rates is just like simplifying up your language and just like honestly dumbing it down. It's like keeping it stupid simple. It's like the easiest way to think about it. So I'll summarize that up. It's just like short sentences, choppy copy, short common words, no jargon, and maximizing how much you're talking about them versus yourself. So I mentioned that like that helps with clarity. I find that a lot of emails are like 20% personalization, like 80% pitch. If you've read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, you know that it's actually the opposite that wins. And so you have to like flip that model within your email. And so, you want it to be like 80% you, 20% me. It's one of those things that salespeople have such a hard time with, that we even had to like adjust the scoring within our product because it was like too harsh and people were like, I just don't agree with you. It's because like at a certain point you're trying to explain like, here's what we do, but there's ways that you can go about it that aren't going to necessarily hurt that ratio. And so the first is like, stop talking at your prospect. Like, your prospect does not care about some Deloitte white paper that you want to reference that is like the key to why your product is like fantastic and they need to care about it. You have to tie it back to them and what they're focused on. The other place that I see folks struggling when it comes to this IE ratio is like, well, how do I like build credibility if I'm not talking about myself? And I mentioned this earlier, but it's letting your customers tell your story. You don't have to talk about yourself in a way that doesn't build that credibility. It's hey, I've seen other folks in the space dealing with it. Folks that you can probably relate back to. And because we've seen that, we offer something that solves that. Really like what you talk about as far as yourself and what you do, 1 to 2 sentences max again. And so make it as crystal clear as possible what you do. Probably whatever marketing calls your product is something you should never use within a cold email.
Can you repeat that and put marketing everywhere on blast?
Yeah. I'll use an example that I actually picked up from an email today that I was looking at. Customer experience platform. Can someone tell me what comes to mind when I say customer experience platform? Because it can mean probably 12 trillion things. And it doesn't tell me anything about what you do or what you sell. I just know you sell software at this point, and it's somewhat related to customer experience. Turns out the thing was a survey tool. And I was like, okay, like how was I supposed to get from there to there without like you explicitly stating that to me? So something to think about. Like it's easy for me. Like I'm a founder. I love to talk about my product, probably more than like the average Joe, but I know that my prospect does not care whatsoever. They care about, understanding really cleanly what it is. So it's like, oh, it's an in-inbox assistant. It's like, okay, I can kind of get a sense of like it lives somewhere and it assists with email, right? And then it's like, what are the outcomes that happen? It's like, sales reps that use it get twice the replies. Like that, it's like very simple. Like I'm trying to get to, what we do and what comes as a result of doing it. When you're in like the services space, it's easy to want to be like, well, we do so many different things and it depends on like the clients. Like, great, just say like, I run a consulting business that works with folks to, produce more revenue. They know that a consultant has to take a number of different approaches to make that happen. And so like, that's sort of where I'm at when it comes to talking about what you do. I probably beat this dead horse to a pulp, but it's one of those things that I find people struggle with. And so it's like a good exercise for it is, if you have 6 seconds to describe what it is that you do, like, how would you describe it? It probably wouldn't be what the marketing team is putting out there. Yeah. Next thing I wanted to speak on is mobile first. Yeah, my phone is sitting right here. I imagine yours is somewhere nearby. It's where you are 8 times more likely to have your initial interaction with a cold email. So with that in mind, you have to optimize your white space so that the message does not come across as a giant wall of text. I see this all the time where like folks will personalize an email and it like just starts with like 4 lines of text. A good way to look at it is in Gmail when you're writing the little compose window, every line becomes 2 lines on a phone. And if you're in like a response, every line becomes like 4+ lines. And so like realizing how to come across the other individual, especially when like you're talking like post cold email response, and like say they ask a question and like you're just like in your zone answering the question in the little reply box, and like next thing you know they get this like monster wall of text back on their phone where they're reading it and they're like, okay, this is probably too much work, I don't want to deal with it. It hits the delay button, even if it's like something that they've opted in to hear more about. It's just one of those things that can be a place where folks get wrapped up. CTAs, I touched on this a little bit. One thing I do want to hit on is if you are using interspace CTAs in a cold email, you're going to perform twice as well as if you're using a specific ask for time. A general ask for time is going to do the worst. But after you've gotten that initial response, the story actually flips. What you want to do is immediately like try to get a specific time, as opposed to like, great, like, do you want to have like a conversation about this? Like they've already started that conversation. And so now your job is to like move that deal forward to the next step. Like obviously like keep dialogue going, but recognize that the initial touch is about conversation, not conversion. And once you've got that conversation going, then you can focus on the conversion afterwards. And then last thing with email, cold email writing in particular, is just cutting the fluff out of your writing. So the I thinks, the just, the phrases like customer experience platform, just like kill them from your vernacular because they're extra and they're getting in the way. I have a writing process that I use where like I'll write out my email and I will comb through meticulously and cut any obvious fluff. It's like, did this add value to the writing? Then I will scan it again and see, hey, where are my eyes getting stuck when I try to scan through this? I know my prospect's going to scan it, so I try to scan it too. And if there's any moment where I'm not like continuously gathering information, I immediately start editing in that spot. Was it a word? Was it the formatting? Was it a specific sentence that came before it where I got left out? I'll read it out loud to myself and I'll edit the things that kind of sound funny, give it a final scan. And at that point, like it's probably good to go. It sounds like it's a lot of steps, but like it takes 1.5 minutes at the most, like especially if it's like an important email. If it's just a regular email, it could take 15 seconds. But you just kind of have to make sure you're cutting the crappy fluff out of your writing and just reducing it down as much as possible. So I realize I kind of accelerated through the last few there, but I'm also looking at the time and I realized it's getting close to 8:30. And so I wanted to open it up for some more Q&A. That said, do y'all have any questions now that I've kind of...
I think Jacqueline has a question. She can go next.
Hey, Jacqueline.
Hi, good to see you on here.
Yeah.
Excited to be here, excited that you're here. I would love to know, I love lavender, of course, and I would love to know what's on the roadmap.
Well, I know this will be something that you love, is personality data. So it's sort of our roots is personality insights. So that is something that we are starting to bake into the product. I know you're a big Crystal Nose user.
Yeah, but they wouldn't hire me, so I'm just gonna like stop subscribing to their like company. Period. Not with the money. Do you see yourself partnering with like Crystal Knows or Grammarly down the line, or do you view yourself as like, do you compete in those spaces at all, or no, not really?
No,
Jacqueline's like a VC right now, dude. This is like the questions.
I know.
There you go.
I was gonna say I'm used to these questions. No, I don't see us as competitive. Grammarly is a stellar tool focused on spelling and grammar. Like, yes, we have that in the product, and we're gonna start rolling it out more broadly. But yeah, it's not something that like I view as a competitive landscape that we're trying to compete on. We're building out in a number of different ways. So like my thinking on is, can I help you get through your inbox faster? Can I help you write emails to get more responses? And can I make you feel more confident about those emails? With that, we're looking at like pulling in more data to personalize what we do back to like how you write. So say like you're selling into financial services, and just like being more formal is gonna get you more leads, or government being more formal is gonna get you more leads in the door. Like our product will learn from how you write, and we'll actually we're releasing this in the next few weeks, but you'll actually have a coaching dashboard where you can dig in and actually understand the data and understand what's driving those things. So that's probably the biggest thing on the roadmap, is sort of that gong for email.
Wow.
The other place that we're advancing would be pulling in those event triggers. So things like, those personalization notes that I mentioned, like, oh, they're hiring, oh, they got funding, giving that to you up front so that you can then go turn it into a good email. And then the last place that we're really focusing a lot of time and energy is on the automation of a lot of the writing process. So a lot of times, like, you say things over and over, and like templates were a good start to get us there. But we've got the technology where we can get you started with that draft, or we can get you started with that email so you're not stuck in writer's block. So those are some things that we're working on right now that are in beta, but they're about to get a lot better. That's probably the.
Well, if you ever want to test them out on me, I'm happy to throw my name in the hat. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Hopefully that answers a good bit.
Anybody else? Any last questions for Will at all? Mackenzie.
Hello. This is also my first time here, and I've been really learning a lot. I've been very fortunate in my company that our growth team does a lot of our sourcing of our leads for us. But the more I read about cold emails, and I was a past writer, I'm excited to do this and see what kind of leads I can bring in on my own. What would you say is a good amount of emails you should run in a given campaign?
Good amount of emails that you should run in a given campaign.
And I know this is like a
trick question.
Yeah.
Depends. I'd start with like, what's your target market? Like, are there like 4,000 leads that are floating out there and you need to touch all of them? Is the company just starting out? In which case, like, every deal that you bring in could be like hugely impactful for the growth rate. There's a lot of things that we could touch on.
Yeah, I'm mostly working with SMB companies and targeting their engineering and product teams.
Okay. So I would tie this back. So there's probably some simple math that we could do where it's like, okay, if the average email that you write gets a conversion of X%, and X% of those conversions then go on to do a demo. Demos move on to being a closed deal at a certain point. You can do the calculation to figure out, okay, how many outreaches do I need to do? Once you've got that math down, that's when you can start to dig in to, okay, well, what are the things that are in my control? The things that are in my control are how many outputs I put out per day. And I've got an average sense for how many of them are going to convert. but I've also got a control over, the quality of the writing that goes out the door, which, has an effect on the response rate. And so, for me, like I hold myself to like 10 personal touches a day. That doesn't necessarily include like the more off the cuff things like a bump email where it's like, hey, did you see my note? I thought this would be relevant for the following reason. Like that takes 2 seconds to write. And so I don't necessarily calculate that as like a particular like follow-up. But if you think about it, if you're touching 10 people per day, over the course of a month, that's 200 touch points because there's 20 business days in a month. So you can get those numbers up pretty quickly.
Okay. Thanks. Right. I mean, I guess right now, like for follow-ups, just after a call with somebody, I'm doing about like 5. Would you say like in between, like this is too little and this is way too much that you might give me as a framework to go off of?
Gotcha. Yeah. I think like you're thinking here, it's like I've already got pipeline for myself and like I'm just trying to generate extra. Yeah, I think 5 is a little slim. I think you could probably get it up to 10 if you do some time blocking. So like, okay, I'm gonna block off like 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. every day, and I'm just going to like write cold emails for an hour. Like you'll be amazed with how quickly you can get through those things and get them out the door.
Okay, great. Thanks for
Yeah,
that.
a good podcast, Amy Volas, who Scott knows well, as we all do probably within this group. She went on with Morgan Ingram, and Morgan Ingram described like his outbound process where he's got like a ton of customers that he's working with, and he's always working to like get new ones within the pipeline. And he does 10 personalized touches a day, where it's like, it might be like 5 videos, it might be 5 cold emails, it might be 10 and 0, like depending on what he's up to. But I think that's like a good benchmark to set for yourself, because if you're like truly thinking about it, and I think what's nice is you've got that down funnel experience, is you can bring that experience back into like, hey, you're probably dealing with the following thing. I see it all the time. It shouldn't be too hard to get those out the door.
Great. Thanks, Will.
And obviously cut yourself slack if you're coming up short. I think that's, I think it's easy to be hard on yourself and be like, oh, I can't believe I only got, 6 cold emails out the door today. The key is just like understand where you got stuck and use that as fodder to get more out the door next time.
Got it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Any last words of wisdom for us?
I see 2 notes. One is emoticons and emails. I'm fine with it. I think there was actually some good data analysis that shows that prospects tend to use emojis more than the prospectors. And then personalized LinkedIn videos, I use them later within a cadence as opposed to early and up front. It's one of those things that I try to use is like, hey, like shot you a couple notes, wanted to just introduce myself and explain why I reached out. Like, is the following thing true? It just shows that you're like making a concerted effort to get in touch with them, and it has a pretty good effect. But final words of wisdom would be make the effort to show them that you've like tried to actually write them a personal, good piece of content. The other would be err on the side of simplicity. Like, don't overcomplicate it. If like you find yourself like thinking about this longer than like 10 minutes, you probably are overcomplicating it. It's probably an easy way to like whittle that down. It's like, okay, my email's gone past like 75 words, and I'm like wondering what's wrong with it. You're probably talking about yourself too much. You're probably just like not writing a simple enough note, and you're trying to over explain and overcompensate. And it's something we all do, but just sort of take it through the lens of the other person on the other end is thinking about you a lot less than you think they are.
Very true. Very true. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and especially big thanks to Will. Connect with Will on LinkedIn. Check out Lavender. Try Lavender. What's the website, Will?
Trylavender.com.
I knew it was that. See, I overthought it there. Try Lavender.com.
And if you misspell lavender while you're typing in trylavender.com, you'll still go to the right spot. So
that was built for me because I don't know how to spell at all, which we already proved that earlier this year. Yeah.
It's one of the funnier things. It's because the word calendar is spelled with an AR at the end. I think people spell lavender with an AR at the end, but it's AR.
I appreciate you making excuses for me. Thank you very much. Till next time, everybody. We'll see you. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, y'all.